of the day. I am joined by Mufuliat Fijabi, the Chief Executive Officer, CEO of Nigerian Women Trust Fund. She is a gender and development practitioner. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, madam.
Thank you very much for having me. Good evening, viewers.
All right. Now, I would like to know, how has the journey been for you as a gender rights activist?
Well, the journey has been a revealing one and an interesting one, and one that requires more resilience to be able to push forward because it's not getting so good in terms of representation of women in elective positions in Nigeria. As seen in the just concluded presidential and national assembly elections. Obviously, the percentage is not very good. It's been dropping since 2011. It's not something to be happy about, because what it means is that Nigeria's democracy is not inclusive.
All right, so for the sake of our viewers, I would like you to tell me a bit about the Nigerian Women Trust Fund. What really is your mandate?
The Nigerian Women Trust Fund is an institution set up in 2011 as a result of collaboration between government and civil society organizations. And the main mandate of the organization is to close the gender gaps in governance. Most importantly, to serve as a resource base for women and leadership in Nigeria.
All right, so let's get into a discussion. What would you consider as the biggest obstacle to more women participation in politics?
One of the biggest obstacles that affects women's political participation is patriarchy. And patriarchy, of course, is deeply rooted in cultural and religious interpretations, that do not favor women's participation in elections and in other political arena. And if I want to go a bit further, I'd like to also speak about the issue of technicalities and resources, that are not there to aid women's participation. And of course, we cannot rule out the influence of money politics aided by corrupt practices in terms of how it makes the playing field unequal for women's participation in elections and in other leadership fields.
All right, then.
When you talk about patriarchy, you may want to look at the notion and belief that women are not considered as qualified leaders who can take on certain positions. There's still that belief that it's better to have men there rather than have women. The understanding that the democratic processes of countries can be enhanced by the equal participation of women and men in leadership is yet to be very well understood by most countries of the world. But in countries where this is understood, remarkable progress has been recorded in how they handle their development processes and in the management of security issues.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. So the presidential and National Assembly elections have come and gone. How will you describe the roles played by women?
Well, we had the Gender and Election Watch Room that the Nigerian Women Trust Fund set up, and it was also run with technical experts who are very experienced in gender. We also deployed observers across the 6 geopolitical zones, specifically in 7 states and the FCT. And most of the observer information that we received showed the resilience of women, and it also showed their commitment, to be part of the building process of the country's democracy. Even with the delayed start of polls and pockets of violence in some polling units, women still showed their resilience by coming out to vote for the candidates of their choice. So women's role in the last election is highly commendable, and it's also one that requires continuous advocacy, in order to encourage more women to participate. We haven't seen the analysis, so far to be able to determine the percentage of women that actually came out, but from the polling units where we observed, we saw resilience in those women. Some women actually slept at the polling units to be able to perform their civic responsibility. So women are highly commended. They are not behind when it comes to participation in what makes Nigeria a country.
All right, then. So going by data and the reports out there, only 1,553 candidates out of 15,307, which is 10% of the candidates that are participating in the 2023 elections, are women. Why the drop when you compare this to 2019 when 2,968 female candidates participated?
A lot of factors, can be linked to that. I mentioned patriarchy earlier on. Some of the women did not find it very easy passing through the political parties' primaries. Oftentimes we look at the election outcomes and how women have not emerged, but actually, in the true sense of it, from the time one election ends, should be the actual time to start the analysis. A lot of the women who went through the political parties primaries in Nigeria faced a lot of challenges, because of party bureaucracies, because of godfatherism, because of violence, because of quite a number of issues. So this already reduced the number of women who qualified eventually as female candidates in election compared to what we had in 2019. And as you rightly said, the number of female candidates is less than 10%. In fact, to be precise, about 7.8% of women, and sadly, from the election that have just been concluded, we've seen that as we speak today, at least the candidates that we've been able to put together, only 3 women have emerged as female senators in the next assembly. We also have about 13 women who have emerged elected for the House of Representatives. This is not a good percentage, and it calls for concerns, it calls for worries, it calls for more strategic thinking, about having a democracy that is truly inclusive. There are quite a number of efforts that are on ground, that could be picked on, to run with in order to change the narrative, in order to change the status quo of consistent exclusion of women. The 2022 presidential and national assembly election is not the first time we're seeing a drop in the percentage of women who are emerging at the level of the national assembly. It's been happening since 2011. And I want to say that it's not a one-off intervention that would address it. It requires consistency. It also requires the political will on the part of government to address this. And it's also high time, the government begins to think about the need, to be deliberate in its inclusion drive, because the experiences and perspective of women are critical, to governance in the world that we live in now.
All right, so going by your analysis and other advocates who have continued to say the drop in female candidates will slow down gender inclusion in politics and governance. For you, what do you think can be done to change this situation?
For me, one of the ways to start is to fully implement the national gender policy of Nigeria. The government has, of course, signed quite a number of international documents, conventions at the level of the United Nations, at the African regional level. But we have a national gender policy, that stipulates a minimum of 35%, of representation, in any political public office, that I think should be respected. And I want to link this to the milestone judgment of 6th of April 2022, where Nigerian Women Trust Fund and other civil society organizations led a litigation, to have the government abide and implement its own national gender policy. This judgment is landmark because the government, for the first time, is being asked to implement its own policy, which is the national gender policy that has been in place since 2006. So what this means is that if at least this policy is respected and implemented, it's going to bring about the much desired change. It means that in addition to the elective offices, women will be adequately represented in the public offices, where they can make their input, where they can make their impact, into the progress that Nigeria makes. One thing we also need to understand is that when we call for gender inclusion in democracy, it's not about women wanting to become men. It's about having a balanced leadership that will bring about good for every Nigerian, both male and female. Thank you. Over.
All right, so another very critical point, whether sometimes mysterious or confusing, is that women constitute the bulk of the voting population, with 44.4 million, representing 47.5% of the total registered voters of 93 million. Why are they not making a count in terms of participation and contesting elections?
Okay, when you talk about the statistics provided on the number of female voters, even though they are not up to 50%, 47% is a great percentage in any analysis and cannot be pushed back. It's not like they are 20 or 35%. It's a huge percentage that needs to be taken on board. And if you want to begin to look at why are women not organizing, why are they not mobilizing, I don't think that we should start the analysis from there. We should go back to independence and look at the roles that women have played. Women played significant roles, even before independence. But the reality on ground is that we need to look at all those decision-making platforms and see if women have been part of it. So the reason why the advocacy and why the government, through its national gender policy, recognize the need for affirmative action, is to understand that as we speak today in this country, women and men are not on the same playing field. There is need to put in an affirmative action to correct that gap, that would enhance the spaces for women to be able to make their input into the processes. Affirmative action is not concession and it's not also condescension. Affirmative action means that there has been some gaps that needs to be closed, and once it is closed, there won't be any need for any further affirmative action. So we cannot just expect that the 47%, of registered voters can just wake up and mobilize. The field is not leveled to give them the opportunity, to play equally. So those gaps needs to be recognized. It needs to be addressed. It needs to be, put in a framework that can lead the country out of the gap. And that's why we keep saying that the judgment of April 6th, 2022 should be respected and implemented. We need to close that gap. We need to make the field level in order to have a balance that will enhance our political process, that will make our democracy one that is inclusive and that will bring about those experiences that we need on the table to bring about the desired change. We talk about security in this country today. There is need for more involvement in terms of experiences. Peace building, peace resolution, cannot be fully achieved according to the UN Resolution 1325, which Nigeria is a signatory to. Women are critical in these processes and they need to be fully involved, to bring about the much desired change.
All right, Madam Fijabi, it's also important to note that, severally on this show, I have had women identify poverty, financial paralysis as some of the factors responsible for low participation of women in politics. How true is this?
Poverty is a recurring factor. When we talk about resources and we talk about patriarchy, you cannot separate both. Patriarchy means the notion of male control. If we look at the positions around the country today, and we look at the representation of women in those positions, it's not significant, which means that women also are challenged with access to those spaces that would enhance their opportunities to have the required economic resources. that can better aid their performance in the society. There's what you call feminization of poverty. Women, because of lack of education, there's male child preference in education. Women, because of lack of access, women, because of nursing at times, are limited by, the kind of places they can have access to. So this, of course, will continue to disempower them and make them, not reach to the extent as to be able to participate effectively well in political leadership processes. So if there's a male child preference, and a girl child is not sent to school, what that means is that that female child remains at the level at which she is, while the male child continues to grow. If we go into real deeper analysis, poverty is not excluded from patriarchal practices.
Yes.
Patriarchy is a big factor. It has a lot of undertones. It has a lot of challenges because the perception is that there is preference for male persons than female persons. And there is need to also understand that the female has a role to play, in any development processes, and should be, as a human being, there is need for the recognition of the dignity of all, both male and female, and as such, there shouldn't be any form of gender-based discrimination, which patriarchy gives birth to. So in essence, the mobilization of women, cannot be enriched because of these challenges. However, women have not been sitting down, because there are challenges. They've been pushing forward. If you look at the female candidates in the 2022 general elections, a lot of them, even as small as the percentages, they faced a lot of challenges. Even on the day of elections, we had some polling units that the kind of violence that erupted, made those women to retreat, whether as voters or as candidates. Some women are also, speaking about some of their challenges that they are facing now, in terms of their candidacy and all of that. So we cannot take all of this for granted. We're not saying that men don't experience challenges, so why are the women talking? The challenges women face are multiple in the sense that at times they are not the cause of it, but they are suffering from it. So this coupled with the lack of resources, makes it difficult. And today, most godfathers in politics will prefer male candidates, than launch their support behind female candidates. So we cannot think that things are usual and normal with all these challenges facing this female candidate. That's why for all the female candidates in the 2023 presidential and national assembly elections, we need to commend them for the efforts and the bold front they've put forward. And we're also using this, I'm using this platform, to advocate that the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act should be applied, in full in instances where the persons have been violated by one form of violence or the other. Because if there's violence, it doesn't bring good for anyone. And if there are laws, the laws should be applied to the fullest so that it could serve as deterrent. It could serve as deterrent because we cannot keep talking about participation in elections, participation of women when the full laws, that protect them from violence are not being applied.
All right. So,
Thank you.
how prevalent is the issue of stigmatization, also religion, culture, especially in core northern areas?
In terms of culture and religion, most practices also still believe that perhaps women's roles should be within the confines of the homes, and it's not so supportive. But we've seen researches, findings, and interpretations that actually support with female leadership, that supports female candidacy and participation in elections. So the spaces are opening up, but not at a rate that one would expect it, because some of these limitations actually, arise because of non-acceptance of female leadership, and this is something that we need to understand better in terms of not seeing women as competitors in these positions, but women as persons who have a role, who have responsibility to also discharge because they have perspective, because they have the expertise and experience they can bring on board any governance process. So religious interpretations should be taken from a progressive perspective, that would impact positively well on the women's participation. And it's not just about the north of the country. It's something that researchers have established cuts across the different geopolitical zones of the country. And the space is beginning to open up, for more conversations around this. I don't think that women's participation should continue to be seen as not normal because women actually do have the human potential and the necessary expertise, to contribute to the processes around them.
All right, Madam Fijabi, we still have a lot to talk about, especially several angles to this discussion. But before then, let's take this commercial break and